All right, I'm going to start with, we have 45 minutes. Feel free to interrupt me during the session because I love questions in between. You don't have to wait for the end. And we will see how that goes. How many of you have heard this word data mesh? Okay, not a lot. Okay, that's good. That's good. Maybe other follow-up questions. How many of you call yourself engineers? Are you like hands-on engineers? Okay. Management roles. It could be product manager, program manager, system admin, architects. Yes. Okay. Great. Then I know the stage, and I'll set the scene accordingly. Perfect. So what is this talk about? So and how many of you have been working in enterprises or startups? Like, what's the kind of, let's say, your work experience? Enterprises, big companies, large organizations. How many of you are in large organizations? Small organizations, startups. Okay. Oh, more startups. So maybe, yeah, we'll see. Anyways. This talk is stemming from the experience that I've worked for a lot of years, and I keep working in and out as an architect, developer. Sometimes I work in the data space as well. So you will see that there is an influence of software engineering that I'm trying to establish on data space, and that's the journey that I'm going to take you through. So a quick agenda of what we are going to do today is we are going to talk about some challenges that data and analytics space has in general. We will talk about how data DevOps revolution kind of has had that influence as an inspiration to figure out, hey, how can we do better in data and analytics space? I'll talk about data mesh and its 4 principles and what are the architectural prerequisites that you need to have in place if you are planning to have that kind of transformation journey yourself. And I will also talk about some reflections from when I try to implement these data mesh kind of approaches in organizations that I've been working at in the last few years. So hopefully that will kind of, let's say, give you certain tools and certain tricks to help you, let's say, implement those details in your area, and you can learn from my experience and don't repeat the same mistakes that I made. A little bit about me. My name is Anurag. I'm originally from India, specifically Pune from India, but I've been living in Sweden for the last 3.5 years. I've been an architect, consultant, developer, data engineer, database engineer. I've been wearing a lot of hats, which might be good, might not be good. I'm a generalist in general. I've worked at a company called as Aurobay Sweden right now. So if you have driven a Volvo car in the recent times, the engine was made by us. So Volvo Cars engine division was taken out and created as a whole separate entity and a separate company, and that's Aurobay Sweden. At the same time, Renault Group in France, they also took out their engine division, and now both Aurobay Sweden and Renault Group are under an umbrella company called as Horsepower Train. So we are through this. We are going through this journey of putting together 2 different kind of organization, 2 different kind of cultures, and trying to build that software organization that is going to help us and where we can leverage data for making informed choices. Because with electrification in here and then looking at, let's say, ICE, it's a big challenge. So we have to figure out other ways of making business and money. And data was one of the areas where they were very interested. So here I am. So let's talk about a typical data enterprise, data function in an enterprise. Again, big corporations might be applicable for some of the startups, but this is what generally happens. So we have a data team, and there are a bunch of rock stars, bunch of superstars, data engineers, data analysts, and they are like a very small function. Always the ratio of this number of people is skewed. So you'll have 500 people working as developers, but you'll have 10, 15, 20 people who are working as DevOps, as data engineers, or they're in the data organization and trying to serve the entire organization, right? So at the heart of their way of working is generally a data warehouse, or in this, let's say in modern times, it's a data lake house. Again, we'll talk about it. If you're interested, we'll talk about the differences about that later. But let's say then an application wants to make use of some data functions, or they want to look at what their data can do. So they borrow an engineer from this limited set of people, 10, 15 people, and they build that ETL or ELT pipeline, take the data from your applications, put that in the data warehouse, do some sort of magic, and then it spills out some reports and stuff. So for all of the applications, now if you're working in an enterprise, there will be like plenty of applications, like 50, 60, 100, 200, who knows. So for all of them, all of those applications, these are the poor fellows who are trying to give service to all of them, and they are overloaded. And they then produce maybe reports, some kind of dashboards. And if you're lucky, they have the time to do some machine learning and fancy AI stuff as well. Most of the time they don't, because they are overwhelmed with just keeping and maintaining ETL, right? But there's a problem with ETL and ELT. ETL and ELT pipelines are like a glass of water, right? So on surface, they're really strong, but all it takes is a little push, and if they fall, they're going to break and shatter. So they're like really brittle ETL pipelines, and that's how ETL pipelines are in general. But at the same time, because these people are like very limited in number, I'm sorry if you can't see this, but the text basically says they become bottlenecks or gatekeepers. Because if you want to do something with the data, you have to get time from them, put things in their backlog, and you have to wait 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 weeks for them to basically respond to your request. And by that time, your data is stale, and you cannot make decisions, and those decisions are already outdated, right? So, and there is a big problem in that as well. So there is the irony is the data is produced by these application teams, but they themselves cannot freely access that data because it is guarded behind the holy grail, like a holy grail in a data warehouse, and you have to, let's say, struggle to get access to your own data. So this model is a little bit crazy, if you have to put it this way, right? Now, if you look really, really carefully, this reminds us of something, right? And doesn't it look familiar now? So we used to do software the same way a few years ago, right? So we had teams that were, wrong button, right? Yeah. So we used to have teams that were doing software, application teams. They were used to build like the dev teams that we used to call them. They used to produce software, and they used to throw over their code over a wall, and then that went into the ops team or operation centers. They took that code, did their build pipeline, and then put it in production and run on your behalf. So we changed this for good, right? So with the DevOps revolution, we came together and we said, hey, this is not right. We need to have like shorter feedback loops. Let's try to build in product teams. We did this for applications, but why are we not doing this for data space? What's wrong with using the same model with data, right? What wrong has data world done for us that it is not moving ahead in the time, right? So that's the question I asked myself, and that kind of led me into this journey of figuring out what exactly is DevOps revolution. So really, really quickly, what I mean by DevOps revolution is we changed that model where we had dev teams, ops teams, and then throwing it around and keeping the things. And we started creating what we call as digital products. So this is the term sometimes called as Spotify model. So where we create digital products where we bring the two different personas, developers and operations people, into in a same team. Now, when they are doing this development, they need a designer, right? So that they can build good data products. In order to shift left and bring quality into the mix, you want to have a quality assurance engineer, and for keeping everything secure, you have InfoSec, and to keep, like say, life cycle of this data products, digital products in line, you have a product manager. So this is how the data teams, this is how the product teams are working in most corporations if you're not yet stuck in the 90s, right? And many people still are, right? And that's the model. Now, you took this, and this Spotify model basically calls for cross-functional teams, which basically means if you are working on an application in an enterprise, you have that faster feedback loops. You can immediately do changes. If it is customer focusing, customer sends in a request, they can do the entire end-to-end life cycle immediately, go to production quickly. Now, if you take this a step further in enterprise, let's say modeling, we do something called as value stream mapping or value streams, where we map out what kind of work we do as a corporation and put it as a map. Now, in order to deliver a one kind of value, right, you create multiple value streams, and these value streams are then supported by multiple digital products out there. For example, let's say, for example, if you have a customer-facing application, you only have a CRM team who is, let's say, taking care of all the requests that are coming from your customers. Then that CRM team can feed that data into your backend team, or you can feed the data into your, let's say, mobile app team, right? So they can take that particular details, and then they can put it to your design organization perhaps, so that they can fix this stuff, right? So we have like multiple teams that are working across a stream of value that we are creating for that customer. So we have done all of this to enhance the Spotify model and all of those areas, and it's working good in, let's say, enterprises in my experience. And yet, we don't have data personas in the value streams. We don't have the data personas in digital product. Why? I couldn't answer this, and then I kind of asked the question to myself, what if we took this DevOps model and tried to apply it on the data world? And let's take a quick journey through that, how that might look. So during that particular, let's say, during that particular journey, I came across this book called as Data Mesh, written by Zamak Dehghani. And basically, the definition that we have put for data mesh is a decentralized approach. Now, if you remember the software model, the DevOps model that I kind of showed previously, it is decentralization of authority across the smaller teams. So why can't, if you have to do this to the data world as well, that's where data mesh basically says. Data mesh is a decentralized but socio-technical approach to manage analytical data in complex environments, whether it could be internal or external or whatever the case it might be. So so the data mesh has 4 core pillars, or the 4 core, let's say, principles that you use to build the data mesh is domain ownership, where we basically say, let's shift left a little bit and let the producers of the data own the data. We start to treat data as a product and not as an byproduct of application. Third thing it talks about, in order to facilitate this let's say, facilitate this entire journey, you will have self-service data products, self-service data platforms. And then in order to bring this all together, you should also have federated governance so that everybody can freely access the data in your ecosystem. So let's take a quick look at some of these, let's say, pillars. Data ownership, basically what it says is, if you remember this diagram from previous, it basically says, hey, let's shift left. How about we let the domains or the application themselves hire a data engineer and, wrong buttons. Hire a data engineer if they're exposing this data, and let them take the ownership of this, right? Now, if I'm a data engineer within that particular product team, I know and understand this data really intimately, and I can then take care of that data and expose this data in a meaningful way that is good for the application, and as per the cadence of how changes are happening in this application, right? So it becomes a product responsibility. Initially, it was the central team's responsibility. Now data becomes product responsibility, right? With this subtle change, what happens is, if you just shift left and put the data engineers back into the product teams, the ETL pipelines becomes product responsibility, so they know when things are gonna break. If they are making any changes, you can have like other software engineering principles on top of it, which are gonna help you propagate the change, and the applications can expose their data meaningfully. Rather than waiting for the data team to make the data available and then use it, they will expose this data. And then this bunch of, let's say, superstar engineers that were there, they move from becoming gatekeepers to enablers for this way of working in data. So this is the first shift that you make. This is basically the idea behind domain ownership of the data. Now, you might say, how do I figure out where the application data, who should take care of the data, which team should take care of the data, where do we draw the line? There you use a big, there you use a concept called as domain-driven design, and it's a big process, a little bit of a big process, but it helps you build that mental map. And once you go through that particular process, you will have something called as context maps. And those context maps will basically help you take a look at your enterprise from a business delivery perspective, business value perspective, and you'll be able to draw these circles, which are basically like, this is the context where all the reservation data, for example, a reservation data will reside, and we will create a product team that exposes the data from this particular context. And you will have a clear definition of, okay, for in this case, we have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different domains, so you could have 5 types of data products out there. The second pillar is we need to stop treating data as byproduct, or you need to stop treating data as something that just happens after you use an application. You rather need to start treating data as a product. So how do we get there? So it's a simple way of visualizing this is this particular model, even when we shifted the engineer behind and gave it back to the product teams, it requires the product and data teams to sync with each other. It still has a little bit of a problem, right? It requires change management, which is still a nightmare, because if I change some data in the ETL pipeline, if I change a data type, then I have to communicate that changes downstream, and then the product data is still not democratized. It's not still accessible to all of those areas. So in order to fix that, you have to do something called as what we call as the data as a product, which basically advocates that if you have an application, you're going to expose the data that is generated by this application with a wrapper, which is data, plus some metadata around it, which kind of helps people understand what kind of data are we doing, and then a data lake or data warehouse, you expose it, right? So change of model. You, instead of relying on team to get your data, you're exposing this data back to them. Now, when you expose this data, you can start using something called as open data product specification, which is like, it's an API-like specification for your data products. Now, if you have these API level specifications in your data product, you can utilize CI/CD processes to do linting. You can define SLAs on when can people expect this particular data. You can apply quality rules on your data sets. So every time a data is exposed from your application, the downstream applications will be guaranteed that the data is of quality, and they can trust this particular data. Now, this open data product specification can also come, there are like multiple options. There is also open data contracts. So you'll be able to utilize your CI/CD pipelines to ensure that this chain of delivery is maintained, and then the data is exposed not as a byproduct, but as a product of a continuous delivery. Every time you make a pull request, your open data product specification is also updated. So all the product teams all the teams that are consuming this data can rely and say that, okay, perhaps we can do versioning of the data products that we have. So you can have the same data set with new data, let's say new data fields that with a version 2. So you can also have backwards compatibility. So that's the second pillar. The third pillar is, now you might say, right, this looks really good, but this also has some problems. What about commercial off-the-shelf products, right? So for example, if you're using SAP, or if you're using Workday, if you're using all of those, some of those, they can't expose this data. How can we go about it? It also has that problem. What if everybody goes on and expose the data in their own fashion? Somebody does in open data contracts, somebody does in some other way. How can we bring that, let's say, consistency? What if people start over-engineering this area? Now, in order to standardize this, in order to fix this, you have to standardize. And for this standardization, the third pillar of data mesh comes in, which basically says, for routinely similar items that are being created by different teams, create an enabling data platform. Again, this is where platform engineering from the DevOps world comes in. You build a platform that enables your applications to use the services to build data products on demand, so they can plug in into your ecosystem, and that ecosystem will provide compute and certain capabilities that will allow you to expose this data in a standardized fashion. So you can let them use this platform, and then they will be able to expose this data in a standard way that everybody in the organization is doing. So in this case, the previous application that we had, it uses this data to just use it for, let's say, reporting, but there could be another application that wants to do something else. So they are still using the data platform, exposing this data set, but they are using this data set for doing RAG or data science or whatever the case it might be. So this particular piece of information is usable by these people, as well as they can use this as a standard and then do optimizations in their own area of work as well. So with this enabler data platform, the centralized team that we had, they become developer accelerators, and they become, instead of, like, they move from gatekeepers to becoming custodians of certain elements. Now this enabling data platform then should have certain characteristics. It should have something called as a data catalog that helps people document what kind of data are they exposing, what kind of elements can you expect, what is the frequency, what is the SLA, how are the change managed, what kind of versions of the data are available. So once you have this data catalog within this enabling data platform, you will have all the data that is available for everyone. This is the way of democratizing data for the rest of your ecosystem. You should also have on-demand compute where any of the application of any type, commercial off the shelf, inbuilt, whatever the case may be, they can plug in. Maybe you could use containers, you could use something else, and you can standardize depending on how your application ecosystem looks like. You can have blueprints. These are like the accelerators that you can use, the platform teams provide for you to expose this data. And then you can also do role-based access control, attribute-based access control. You can provide auditing logs, which also keeps the InfoSec people happy. And then you can also have observability built into this let's say, platform, which will ensure that the data outcome is kept track as any other software asset as you do right now. You keep track of API and API changes. You can also now keep track of what's happening to the data products and how they are behaving in the ecosystem. So now with this, we have like 3 pillars. We have data as a product, we have self-service platforms, and then we said that we have data product as well. We have been able to, let's say, create a local optimum of where all applications are exposing their data sets, and they have some helping hands. But rarely this is enough. You need to, in a big enterprise, you need to bring together the data from multiple of these applications, and you need to weave them together to make a business decision, right? So for example, any data that comes into your ERP which has order details, and then you have your fulfillment data that is going out in some other application, you need to bring them together to figure out, okay, from the order time of order to delivery, how much time did I take? So those kind of details can only be possible if you are able to interleave this data together, right? So how can we get there, right? So there is stream aligned with the local optimum, with the, let's say, data as product and platforms. We were able to create a local optimum, but how do we reach a global optimum where everybody can bring together this data and figure those out? That's where the 4th pillar comes in, called as federated governance, which basically says, once you have the data catalog, this data should be available for anyone freely if they have the right access control or if they have the right permissions in there. So in order to do that, this enabling data platform, you remember I had X as access control, right? So basically role-based access control, attribute-based access control. So once you have these data products, you can start tagging the database products. You can do row level access, you can do column level access, you can hide sensitive data, you can scramble personal information. So all of this enablement comes into the federated governance, and then it kind of gives you this start treating your data as any other API and expose them if you have the right privileges in the organization, right? So with this enabling data platform, you can enforce policies. Policies can be baked in. There is something of a concept now called as policy as code. So you can build in the policy as code as part of your CI, one step in CI, and it can enforce and check the policies if the data is available. Now, the cross-functional team, hopefully, when you implement this data mesh as per recommendation, now it was looking like this. The new cross-functional team perhaps might look like this, where you also have data engineers, data scientists, or data analysts embedded into this cross-functional team, because that is what is needed for us to, let's say, implement data mesh effectively. Enough theory. Let's talk about some personal reflections. I tried using data mesh as a guiding principle to implement data strategy at a previous assignment, and here are some of those reflections. These are some of the things that I observed, and hopefully that helps you. So whenever you're doing whenever you're doing strategy, there are like multiple frameworks of strategy. I like to use this particular framework, which was, let's say, exposed, which is the work of Roger Martins, and it's called as Cascade of Choices. So if you're doing strategy work in any capacity, you're basically trying to ask yourself 5 questions. What is the winning aspiration of this strategy? What is the level area in which you're playing? How will you win? What capabilities must be in place so that you can win? And what are the management systems that are required for us to make sure that all of this is possible? And all these 5, let's say, 5 things you can ask yourself before writing a strategy document. Unless you answer what is your winning aspiration, you should not go further. And if you go further, how will you play? You cannot answer, you should go back and try to answer these questions. So I tried that in a previous organization where we used data mesh as our guiding principle, and I had clear answers to, okay, what was the winning aspiration? The winning aspiration was data should be available in this enterprise freely for anybody to do whatever they want, right? That was my winning aspiration. Where will you play? That was also very well-defined answer. I'm gonna play within the scope of the enterprise with different departments in place. Now, when it came to the third question, how will you win? That's where I had certain challenges. Now, the challenges that I had, since I'm a technical guy, in that sense, I'm like I'm an architect. So I focused way too much on technical output and less on the outcomes. Now these words are really close, output and outcomes. Outputs are like very close to how you're doing technically, but outcomes are like how does the business perceive the value out of it. So sure, if you say that 15 applications are using your data, are part of our data mesh and they're exposing data, but if that data sets are not used to create some meaningful insights, it's useless for the let's say organization. So that was the first mistake I made, where I focused too much on the technical output as the definition of done, as they call it. But rather, if you're doing this, you're going to use this data mesh, you should focus on outcomes and try to let's say put together some of this context together, where you say, okay, if you do this, that is the business outcome that the business people are going to see, and that will help you in the journey. Second place where I had some challenges was when I started to answer the question, what capabilities must be in place in order to get us there? So that's a place where I underestimated the technical know-how in the business people folks, in the business area. So if I tell them, hey, I have a new data set available for you to query, they're like, what is data set? What is a query? I don't know. I don't need to know that, right? So those, you need to figure out how you're going to address those. So that could be through natural language, let's say natural language interface on top of those data sets. It could be through well-defined BI reports. It could be something else, but you should have mechanisms in place that are going to enable that, else those data sets are useless. Engineers, no problem. You tell them certain things, you coach them, they'll be able to get that, but it's really difficult to coach, let's say, business people who have been in the industry for 20 years, but they are only domain experts and they don't understand technology. So never underestimate that if you're gonna do that, gonna do this in your area of work. Also, you need to change how data personas think. So have a very strong onboarding process where you're introducing these concepts that I talked about: data ownership, the platform, what can you expect from the platform, API documentation, and how to do that so that it helps. And the last thing that I made mistakes was what management systems are required, because this This came in as a bottom-up initiative because I was a data person and I could see that the organization is lacking use of data, and it was proposed from bottom up. Hey, what if we took the data strategy in our hands, implement it, and show the value to the data, to the business owners. So if you're doing that, make sure you reach out to at least one management executive in your area. That management executive could be a VP, a director, or some person who has skin in the game, and get their sponsorship to enable this. Now, without the lack of executive sponsorship, you will not be able to figure out, okay, how. So, for example, in the beginning, I told, can we move a person from a data engineer from the central team to a product team, right? To make that move possible, you need to have multiple HR things in place. You need to have that, or let's say, at least in enterprises, you need to have that billing code in place so that you know that this engineer is working certain hours on that particular project, and all of those things that are organizational, right? Those have nothing to do with technology, but they need to be in place in order to make that happen. And that can only happen if you have an executive who is sponsoring this entire project. And this project, again, this will also help you bring that up or put together how can you touch your technical outcome with a value that can bring to this executive out there. Right, all is fine and dandy. If you are really interested in how to, in order to, let's say, implement data mesh as your guiding principle, here are some prerequisites that I think you should have in place before even making that plunge. The first thing in the area of architecture, you need to know your application boundaries really well. Invest some time in, let's say, going through domain-driven design. There is an Italian guy called as Alberto Brandolini, who has devised this workshop-like structure for applying domain-driven design to your areas. I think you should definitely look him up. Really great interactive way of bringing together the business domain, people, architects, and figuring out those application boundaries. You also need to know your information model or taxonomy in the application landscape, as they call it. It's really much more applicable if you're working in an enterprise, may not be applicable so much in, let's say, startups. When you have like 50 different applications, you need to know which application is the leading source of what kind of data. So you could, in enterprises, you will definitely have more than one CRMs which are trying to solve certain problems, right? So there will be a customer-facing CRM, that could be internal-facing CRM, but which is this authoritative source of this particular CRM data? You always need to establish, and the exercise of defining a taxonomy will help you get there. Also have robust identity and access management in place. And when I say identity and access management, I'm not referring to the AWS IAM. It's the general space of figuring out how identity and access management work in your organization. And this IAM, let's say, implementation should be cross-application. It should not be just focused on AWS. So you should ideally implement it as a standalone product in your enterprise, which will then allow you to make that product transitions, data product transition across easier. And really, really important, build value stream maps as a way of visualizing the complexity in your landscape. There is also some things that you need to do in organizational cultural alignment, and this is the hardest part. This is the most difficult part for you to get it done. So tie the initiatives to some kind of business outcome. So you will find typically in an enterprise that there is always a VP or a director who is trying to show how good I am. Be a friend with them and tie your outcomes to that particular project. Right? So there could be, for example, a business executive who's saying, hey, we need to digitally transform on how we do customer, let's say, feedback, how we implement a customer feedback. Find those kind of projects and attach your data mesh, let's say, transitions to that, because then you will be able to show through that outcome to the business that, okay, is the mean time to close a ticket reduced from 8 hours to 2 hours, right? And this happened because we had data mesh in place. So if you can prove that outcome, that's the best way of showing that, yes, it worked. If you don't do that, then again, it's just technical things that a VP will never care or a director will never care. Set OKRs and KPIs across the organization. Again, have that goal in mind, like I said, we need to reduce the mean time to closure of tickets from 8 hours to 2 hours. What are the KPIs that you can then break down for those 2 hours into individual products and let them meet those KPIs? And but again, these KPIs were as an outcome of the business outcome that you are kind of trying to set. Invest in training for all personas, not just data engineers. Train your POs, train your business analysts, train your product managers. And in order to get there, do DevOps game days. DevOps game days are really, really well, let's say, really, really good mechanism in which you can bring together this exercise in a controlled environment. No matter which cloud provider you're working on, they have their own version of game days. So talk to your technical account manager and set up those game days where you can then experiment with doing some of the parts that we are trying to. Dedicate one day to figure out how can we do domain ownership. Dedicate one day of a domain of your game days to figure out how can we do data as a product, right? And do this in a less impact ecosystem or less impact environment, and that's where DevOps game tips come in really handy, because those environments are just to throw away. So you can experiment safely, and it will help you bring that mentality of you own it, you operate it across your let's say teams, not just teams, but also with your business owners who then figure out, okay, if we do this, that means I can implement whatever feature I want without asking somebody else, right? So that kind of light bulb moment you can only have once you have these DevOps days. Or one way of having those light moments is DevOps days. Right, some closing thoughts from my end. So there is a wide, let's say, misunderstanding that if you are doing data mesh, you're getting rid of central data teams. You're not. The central data teams are still here to stay. We are just enabling these people to really focus on the actual work that they were supposed to do in the first place. By taking away the extra workload of producing data from 50 different applications, instead they can just get the data and focus on bringing value out of the data, right? So it's not getting rid of your central teams, it's just enabling teams. It's a socio-technical approach. It requires top-down buy-in. I try to do bottom-up, don't do that. Do top-down, get an executive sponsorship. Data mesh is striving for loose coupling. It's, again, if you see it really, really closely, it's basically talking about 4 principles of agile, right? People and interactions over processes, right? For example, right? That's what we did with principle 1 and 2. So it's nothing but an agile transformation, but don't call it agile transformation. Then swamp of consultants will come in and eat away all your products, all your budget. So be careful on how you project it in your areas. It's a way of loosely coupling your data ecosystem. And this is basically, like I said, it's an agile manifesto applied to data analytics. And finally, some recommendations. So if you're really interested into taking this, the things that I've put together, and you want to figure out how it's going to work in your company, because every company is different, everyone does different things. So I recommend reading these 4 books. The first and the former, and if you can choose only one book, I would recommend the Phoenix Project, which kind of helps you get that DevOps mindset instilled. But if you are into figuring out how to do value stream mapping, read Flow Engineering. That kind of helps you figure out those areas. Team topologies kind of helps you how to divide the work between stream-aligned projects and cross-organizational, team-aligned product teams and cross-organizational product teams. And of course, data mesh. This is like the, let's say, the first authoritative piece that has been published around data mesh that will help you understand the concept even better than what I did in today. With that, thank you very much for taking the time. Here's my LinkedIn profile, and I'm also pretty active on Twitter. Yes, I will still call it Twitter. I refuse to call it X. And I'm pretty active there. If you have any questions and if I can help you with anything, I'm always responding on my LinkedIn, so please do that. And the Scan Me is basically for feedback. So please take a moment, scan it, and send me, and just take 2 minutes to write what you think about these particular presentations. With that, thank you very much, and I hope you have a nice day.